What is
What's
going
going
on?
on?
Just saw my fire. My eyes were like this, wide jumping in. Guys, what's going on? It is Friday. It's Community Beacon, June 28th, 2024. I'm excited to be here. Of course, I'm Michael Saville. And on the other side of the screen, we got you almost look like Tiger Woods for whatever reason today.
You know what? If I look like Tiger
Yeah,
Woods, it just is what it is.
Joe Simmons has a Tiger Woods thing going on. It just hit me, and something's going on. Tiger Woods, and so we have great, which means we have greatness in the building. Because one thing about it, Tiger Woods is probably one of the greatest golfers that we've seen in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you just need the TW. That's probably what it is. The TW on the hat. That might be.
All right.
That
As
might
soon
be
as
the.
I get out of here, I'm gonna put a JS up there.
Oh, the JST, same thing. What's going on, guys? It is Community Beacon. It's Friday. It's 6:30. Probably for you. That's the one I'm going to drop this episode. It's still Friday for us. Last week we did a live. That was dope. We spoke about self-worth. We spoke about value in regards to manhood. We're still on this series of manhood. We're actually doing a show. Could have been done 2 weeks ago, but that wasn't in the plans. And this week, so we'll be diving into fatherhood, which is probably, I would say, it's probably one of our top priorities and values at this time. The brother has 3 children. I have 2. So we're always growing and succeeding and learning in regards to how to get better. I call what we our growing is the opposite of what I call lazy parenting, which is basically I'm just doing stuff because it was done to me. You know what I mean? Like I think oftentimes we do things within our parenting because it was just, it's just how we grew up. It was within our culture. This happens. We spoke this way. Sometimes I even catch myself saying, "Oh man, I sound like my mother," or I sound like my father right now in regards to it. Not to say that any of them did a bad job. Naturally they haven't. I wouldn't say they did. However, we can always grow. We can expound. We can get, it's about and get it aligned with our values and the times. But I think for the most part, in regards to parenting, the principles stay the same, right? Like we want to make successful. We want to see our children come off successful. We want growth. I definitely would like to incorporate critical thinking with the children. Love, compassion, patience, just instilling a lot of the things. The Bible talks about training a child up in the way, and then when they get older, they'll return. And I think, that has resonated with me because I too had my rebellious stage, where if my mother or father said it was left, I just knew it was right, and if it was up, if they said it was up, I just knew it was down. Kind of finding myself in the world, and then eventually it comes back to, oh man, these people are pretty dope, and they had my best interest in mind. And so I think for me that I probably was around 20 when that happened. 22. We still bumped heads, but at around 22, I'm just like, well, these, they're not as bad as I made it seem. Because I remember there was one period of time when I just thought it was just hell on earth. I was like, how could you do this to me? Who are these people? And then it's like, oh man, these people they're there for me. They're loving, they're patient, patient. And then getting into their childhood was like, huh, okay, I can see where this comes from, where these experiences come from. And so just developing the relationship from that point on, and it was fruitful for me.
Yeah. What's up, everybody? That's Michael Saville, the real estate king. And I'm Joel Simmons. We are here. My man didn't even get a chance to say hello.
I didn't.
No, you just came in.
Did I?
Man, I think the Tiger Woods look just kind of like it was off, and then he was off to the races, man, dropping a whole lot of jewels in the first couple of minutes of this thing. Definitely appreciate it, man. It sounds like what we're talking about is really diving into like legacy. I'm hearing a legacy type of language where I came from, who I am, and what I'm delivering to my youth. And I love that. I love that. Mike is like, man, we've been talking about raising children for years now. It was a while ago that we didn't really have these types of conversations, man. We just, hey, man, what's up? Years ago. But we just got a little bit tighter and we started to dive into like life, reality, what's going on in your world, in my world, in the world of our brothers, Lou, Beethoven, and a few other people that continue to strike up a conversation. It was like, man, what are you doing? What am I doing? Even Chris, you
Oh
know,
yeah, yeah.
Mark, we started to have conversations with them and talking about some of the things that they're doing to be able to have a positive effect on their families. And now with the gathering, there's a lot more brothers, like Brandon is a real big one right now, who's very strong on, hey, what's going on with my family, your family? What are you doing with your children, my
Shouts out
children?
to Brandon for sure.
Shout out to Brandon and Willie, you know,
Yeah.
for sure, man. I mean, these guys, there's a whole sway. I mean, there's a bunch of these guys, but it's just like we're in a community now where it's stress. Like, let's get this thing right. We only got one option, either do or don't. We only have one time, now or never, and it's like children are growing. And you were just mentioning it, 22 years old. I I was pretty blessed. I think that I ran my head so many times into a wall that I just kind of like got it together at a relatively early age, by the age of, I say 19. I was trying to do right, but it's not like wasn't like it was easy. I just started to understand maybe my mother understood something better than I did. Maybe the way I was looking at things wasn't the way that the world really was. And I think that perspective as a young person is huge. I mean, I look at my children, my three children, and Mike, I've been talking with my eldest for quite some time now. Um, I guess it's quite some time, consistently, consecutively, every single day, whether it's text, voice recording, or video recording. Every single day we talk about things, and the amount of stuff that you learn in the amount of time that we spend together, priceless, priceless. And the types of stuff that have been revealed because of the exercise that we are utilizing is life altering, changing.
You got to jump into the exercise. You have to touch on that.
So the exercise, if you all saw the last episode, maybe 2, 3 episodes ago, the exercise is we are listening to an audio book together. And we listen to it for about a half hour, sometimes longer. And then we send some type of message of what we gained, what we want to implement, or how we feel after listening to what that audiobook had to say. And the audiobook is by Bob Proctor. I think it's Dan Struessel is interviewing Bob Proctor. This is probably about 4 years ago, 2020. This is like during COVID, 2020, 2021, somewhere around there.
Yeah, I think it was 2021. Yeah.
So this is the interview. This interview. It could be late 2020 also.
Right,
But
right.
this is the interview. Somewhere it's right around there, give or take 6 months. And they put this interview on, and then I guess they've developed a book out of it, but it's called Change Your Paradigm. And it's very, very impactful. The truth of the matter is the more you listen to it, the more it impacts you. While we're doing this, there's so many other things that are non-directly associated with the material that is changing inside of our life. It's just phenomenal. I'm very grateful. I intend to put on some type of program that is similar to this, because if anyone were to do this like I've been doing this, and like my daughter and I have been doing this, I almost dare somebody to not have a change in their life by doing something like that. Like I double dare somebody to get an accountability partner, someone that they care about how that person thinks about them, to try this exercise for 60 to 90 days and not have a change, not have a positive result in their life. I don't believe that you can not, especially if you're going in with the expectancy of positive results and finishing, finishing, and learning the entire way through. And that touches on your critical thinking right there, Mike. Like, this is legacy development. It's like,
Yeah.
I came, when you were talking, I came up with like 2 or 3 questions. It's about the narrative, right? The narrative, because you started talking about your parents and what your parents taught you. That's what you started talking about. And you started saying that it wasn't until you were like the age of 22 when those things really started to break down on you. And then there was still a little bit feedback or whatever, discussions, whatever that little bit was that you're referring to. But then I started to think, okay, why do I do what I do? I felt like that's kind of what you were saying in some ways. Why does Mike do what he does? Is it because of what his parents have given him? It's because of his interpretation. And then I started to think about, why does Mike raise his children the way he raises them? Is it because of the narrative of his parents? Is it because of the adjustment that he made after the age of 22 in creating or rewriting his own narrative, whether he knew that's what he was doing or not? And I was like, I thought about those 2 questions because those are major questions as a father, I think, that we go through. And I think that it's probably something worth jumping into, diving deeper. What'd you say?
I I'm going back and forth. That we speak about fathers. My son is texting me about getting cornrows in his hair right now. So
Oh my gosh, not the cornrows. Oh no.
yeah, it is. So,
All right,
so,
what's
so
the answer? What's the answer?
for the cornrows,
Yeah.
so what I've made him do previously, because he was asking about this some time ago, and it's not that important, so he kind of forgot, and I'm just like, oh well, we'll just let it drift off as well. But what I actually made him do was research it.
Okay.
So I told him, I said, listen, go in, research cornrows. It's not that hard. I sent him a couple videos in regards to where people are talking about not just cornrows, but hair in general. Why do men have, what we call locks now? So what was the original purpose for locks? What was the, what are you doing it for? I know it's a style. I know we see a lot of young men going around with, this certain style. This is what's in, this is what's going on now. But don't just stop there. Get a little bit deeper and then see if you align with the reason. I mean, ultimately he's going to align with it because he wants to be in he wants to be in style. But I wanted him to do the research on it because maybe there may be something there that he doesn't like. And then it also gave me some information as well, because there's certain things that he researched once he gave me, I think he wrote like a page on it. Once he gave me the page, and I was like, oh, okay, I didn't know that was there. I didn't know that was the reason. It's funny and interesting because as long as my hair is now, it used to be longer, right? I had locks growing up as a kid, or as a I wasn't a kid. I probably was in my 20s. And I remember going to Jamaica, where locks has a different meaning. Locks has a different meaning to it. And my grandfather said, he basically said, how are you a dread, a Rasta? That's what they would correlate
Okay.
it with. So he's calling me a Rasta. He said, how are you a Rasta and you still eating pork? That's what he said when I was there with my hair long. And
Mm.
it, and everybody who pays attention knows how much importance I placed on my grandfather and his words. And I promise you, I haven't eaten pork since then, and I no longer have the locks, etc. But I don't. I stopped eating pork. It was a bunch of things that came out of that. First off, finding out how addictive it is, but it was also just based on him and his and how he viewed me and what his word meant to me. So that was the answer to that. To dive deeper into the question that you asked, brother, which I think are some awesome questions. What I'm starting to understand in regards to wisdom is that wisdom doesn't really or getting deeper doesn't really give you answers. It just gets you more questions. Like we say, oh well, where is this coming from? So to answer your question, I think it all like it's what our experience is, and then our interpretation of that experience of our experiences. This is how we normally come to do some of the things that we do, and then we start to begin to set rules based upon that. So at this age of 22, when I'm just like, my mother isn't that bad. She calls me too much, but I don't, I can see what this is about. Of course, I didn't have children at the time, so I don't, and I'm not a woman, so I don't know why um, she felt the need to do it. I did ask her questions later on in life after I had become a father because I started to get an affinity to it, or started to do the same things that she did. Um, but it doesn't it starts off like what you mentioned, the narrative, what's going on in society, right? Like what that plays a part in the fatherhood role, or how we exemplify it. What happened in the past? Where was our fathers? My father is spending some time with me now and I'm enjoying it. He's up here from Jamaica, to where I get to ask him questions about how he got to learn the history of what he did and why he did what he did, the sacrifices he made, why he felt he needed to make those sacrifices. And then it just gives me something to kind of bounce it on as far as where I'm at. And then where do these people come from too, right? Like I don't know if people know, like the grandparents like change. I don't I can't well my like they're different people. I'm like, where were these people? Where were these people? Where's the spare another rod? You know what I mean? Like where and they're just not the same toughness. Like you're like, what? Like you're dancing and you're hugging and you're laughing and you're playing around. Like I don't remember this growing
Hey,
up.
my eldest daughter came back home one year and she was like, "Who are these people?"
But
She
but
was
she said
talking about me and
she's
Kathy.
talking about you, yeah. So, and I'm gonna tell you what, I think Paul or Elijah's gonna say the same thing to Paul. Like I don't you got a different father than I had. You know what I mean? Like you all because we're learning and we're growing. I asked my father that recently, and he said that we learned from the mistakes that not mistakes from what we thought we could have did better in, and then now when we become that grandfather role, I heard the minister talk about this as well. Now that I'm in this grandfather role, I'm seeing it quite differently. Uh, I often talk about nonviolent communication, and in nonviolent communication, there's like three levels to communication. So there's dominance, there's correction, and then there's connection. And so I think initially as a parent, we do a lot of dominance because we want to keep our kids safe. And then as we start to graduate, as they get a little bit older, we just start to just do correction. And then I think ultimately, which is what I think the grandparents I've seen do in my experience, is that they just connect automatically. They tend to have more compassion and more empathy. And at the same time, and this is where we're really going to get into the crux of the conversation, as far as I think as far as fathers roles in the household, is that grandparents don't really have that protection that we put on ourselves, that we value as I think as fathers and men in the household, whereas like we feel like we have to protect, and sometimes we can be quote unquote overly protective in the way that we demonstrate it, right? Like instead of saying we got so much going on because we're still working, we're still providing, we're still doing all these other things that we believe that we need to do as men in the household, and you just want to say things one time and them just get it, right? Like you just want to tell your child, don't go in the, just don't go on the street, and they just get it. And they've never been told why you're not to go on the street, right? We've never broke it down because we're so far ahead of it, which takes us coming back and connecting. I think the grandparents have a little bit more time. I mean, look at your mother and her interactions probably with her, with your kids, and probably the explanation. She'll sit there, as in my experience, my mother will sit there and used to sit there and explain to Elijah and have like a whole 15-20 minute conversation. And Elijah's just like, but why? But why? But why?
It still ain't landed.
Yeah,
That plane ain't landed yet.
but she's still working it out. I see my father do it to him. My father's having these long, drawn out conversations with Elijah, and I'm walking past, listening. I'm just like, "Hey man, just do just do what you're supposed to do." You know what I mean? Like you're like, just we don't have time for this. We gotta just do what you're supposed to do. However, I think that comes with the compassion as we get older. If we're developing these values, our values and value system, then we start to think about the patience side of it. Like being patient with our kids. They say love is patient, right? You start to be a little bit kinder, and then we get into I think that what you're doing with your eldest daughter, these exercises, which I think is like the ultimate epitome of what I would call leadership, is to where we're having these 30 accountability with these 30-minute discussions, but as at the same time being gentle. Because I would imagine that the book that you're reading, shifting your paradigm, I think is the name of the book, is really exciting to you, but to them it might be like, you know what I mean? Like it's not, it's something to do. However, being the patient, kind person you are, you're like, we're just going at the pace. Because I know because that book you can actually sit down. Like I know you and I probably could sit down and listen to it in like a 6 hour, whatever, however long it is. I think
Yeah,
it's not,
yeah.
it's
At its regular speed, it's probably about 5.5 hours. And before I started this with her, I was probably listening to it in about 2.5 hours, maybe 3 hours max. I mean, I had that thing at 1.5 or two.
right.
And man, I was blowing through it. I probably, by the time I actually started with her, I probably had already listened to it about 7 times.
7 times. Like you're that's a,
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
want to
I
I want
I
to call
I've
you a
been on it
nut.
for about 14 days, and
For-
I had gone through it. Maybe it may have been more than that, Mike. I mean, I was just like, but slowing it down, Mike, was something else. And she actually wanted to be a part of the process. It's just where her mindset is right now. She said something. I was listening to her. The cues came up. They were the right cues. So I offered the opportunity. I sent her the book and she downloaded it and started listening by the next day. And plus the medium was right for her as well.
right.
And so that's something that we ought to consider also, going from our parents to ourselves to our children. The medium makes a huge difference. If I asked her to sit down and read that book while she's still in college, I don't know that she'll want to do that, because I asked my other daughter, who reads phenomenally, and she was just like, "Dad, if I got to read another book,
Yeah.
I can't take reading
Right.
another book." But the ability to listen to it, that's what the young people are doing now. They listen to everything. So it's like you got to break out of your own shell of things if you want to be able to step into the lifestyle of your child and to have some type of progress.
That's the connection part of it.
That's the connection part. So I'm
It's
I'm
not.
a grandpa now.
Yeah, essentially, you graduated, right? Like we're
Yeah, how about that?
graduating to the, well, and we're being facetious when we say it because we all can do it. But this is a part of the growth. This is the building on the building, right? The building on the foundation
Mm,
of our parents and stepping into it. Um, I think there was a while back when we kind of went over fatherhood. This is not our first go round, and you
no.
kind of spoke of at the time in regards to fathers and men in the household, uh, almost like the being the pillar and the post, like being the structure of it. And maybe you can go a little bit more into depth on that as we dive into this topic of
Mm,
conversation.
mm. Being the pillar and the post?
Yeah, yeah. You spoke about like the fathers being the structure or bringing structure.
That's interesting. Yeah, honestly, I don't remember exactly what we talked about. That was quite some time ago, but I'll answer the question nonetheless, and I'd be interested in how much of what I say this time will line up with what I said before. I'm
Right.
actually kind of curious myself, but I do feel like fathers. I do feel like a family is built on fathers, or at least I believe that it should be built on fathers when it's at all, when you can build it on the father, build it on the man. Just as far as the structure goes, from God to humankind, it's like God, then there's Christ, and then there's the man, and then there's the family. And that's the construct of how things were set up biblically. So if you look in the Bible, you'll see Christ is the head of man, just as man is the head of his wife. And so it's an interesting construct when you look at it that way. It's like this is the delivery system. And then if we were to go back into the Old Testament and read back into Genesis, you will find that God created man, quote unquote. This could be the symbol of mankind, but then it broke it down and it said male and female created he them. Then there was this breakdown of the first surgery that was ever performed, which is when we understood that male and female created he them was not necessarily he them, but it was he him until there was a separation making it he them. So there was this movement. Remember now, God being a creator doesn't need male or female properties because he births things on his own. As he creates things in his mind and speaks things through his mouth, things become alive. And so this is the process of God. If we're created in his image, then I would think that from the very beginning, the image that we were created in, the express image, would be that much closer to whatever he is. But now we have a visual perspective of it. So in essence, though, he didn't want man to be alone, so he opened man up and brought out a woman so that the woman could be brought to the man. And then there was the formal wedding that was there. So I believe that the the basis of the structure of the family should be on a man. And when you say on a man, that means that all others would almost be above that man. And this is the tricky part when you're talking about above and below and side and stuff like that, because it's like this. If if a man is the foundation, you pour the foundation first and everything else is built on it.
Right.
So there's a higher value. There could be considered to be a higher value on the things that are above. For instance, most people don't purchase a home because of the foundation, because you can't see the foundation. You may purchase a home desiring a strong foundation, so you pick a name that is synonymous with strong foundations, but you can't see the foundation except you're building from creation. If you're building from creation, you can see the process of the
Right.
groundwork. You can see the process of laying of the foundation. You can see the process of attaching all the other things that come afterwards. But the bottom line is that when you go and purchase a home, you purchase it by the desire of the eye. The beauty of the building and its way that it can service you is why
Right.
you purchase that home, and along with a few other things, place and how close proximity, things like that. So when thinking about that as a family construct, the man, he's kind of rudimentary.
Yeah.
He's the basis. So it's not that he has to be like this charming and whatever, whatever, whatever. He's got to be strong. He's got to be uh, pro- uh, able to provide, able to support, able to hold up. And when I say strong, I don't mean like build your muscles up. I mean, you need to be mentally strong. You need to be emotionally strong. You need to be spiritually strong. because these are the true things that will make or break the entire family. There's going to be certain opportunities where a man has to flex himself to a certain degree. But if you're wise enough to stay outside of the bounds of when you have to flex your muscles to protect your family, then the odds are you may not even run into those types of scenarios where you would have to come forward like that.
Right.
Most of the time, we put ourselves inside of positions or places where we have to do that by being around the wrong people or being in the wrong places at the wrong times. But just through wisdom and spiritual discernment, we can actually avoid a lot of those things in many cases. That's my belief. So then what is it? It's the mind, it's the heart, the compassion, the love, it's the provision of feeding people the words that they need to have to make
Hmm.
them strong internally rather than strong externally, because external strength can always be diffused, it can always be destroyed, it can always be broken. But and then because of internal strength, it can always be rebuilt. If I got a strong mind and I get injured, look at some of these guys that go to war. You can tell when they have strong minds because they come back without an arm, without a leg. And next thing you know, they're getting a prosthetic or whatever. And now they're running marathons and they're proving to everybody in the world that it ain't got nothing to do with how I look on the outside or whatever. Their brain, their mind was so doggone strong that loss of an extremity did not stop them, and they are successful at a high level. Matter of fact, sometimes they come out of these scenarios and they're even more successful than they were beforehand because their mind was so strong. So when we start talking about what we're doing with our children and with our wife, I do believe that the structure is built out of the man, because he's not most men are not heavily leaning on emotions to fix scenarios. They're devising plans. They're attempting to create what has never been created. This is our God given form to make something out of nothing, to look into something and to figure out what can I tweak to make this thing work.
Hmm.
In a very common language style of speaking, how can I jerry rig this thing to work? Right? It's like, I just can't figure it out. Oh man, let me go get a hanger. Let me put
Right.
the hanger on the back of this TV, tilt it to the left, tilt it to the right. Oh, yeah, I did that. Y'all go ahead and watch the TV. And it's like men are always attempting to figure out how to fix things. I think that sometimes a slight tangent, slight path adjustment. Sometimes that is the very thing that some women may find um, obstructing their relationship, is because men are always looking for a way to figure things out. And
Yeah.
sometimes we actually have to sit back and allow things to just work out, allow things to just flow out, because sometimes women will be very complex and they'll speak so much. And while they're speaking, they're solving their own problems. And we're so ready to solve their problem for them that we jump in before they've finished, and we end up diverting them from actually solving their own issues, which is the reason why a lot of times when women speak with each other, they solve all the issues of themselves in their world, because women listen to themselves and men don't always listen to their wives, to their women. This, like I said, slight diversion, but I would think that this is the reason why I believe that men are the structure. They're the pillar and the post. They're the pillar, the strength of the family, and they're the post. They're the one that the family leans on. You get a strong pillar, and all will come and lean on him. He'll become a post at some point in time.
I love it. There's almost nothing to add. You know, I especially enjoy you speaking on in regards to the foundation. When we go through houses and we do inspections one of the things that you're really looking for. Like there's all
Mm,
these things that people are looking for. Most people are looking at what there's a leak underneath the sink or something, which is minor, but you want to check it. You definitely don't want to buy a house if that can be avoided. What's going on with the refrigerator? We checking that, we're checking that as well. But that structure, that foundation that most people don't see is probably one of the biggest, like, what's this about? That coming up during an inspection is something that almost you can never recover from. Not having a solid foundation. When you start to see cracks in the foundation, it's a huge red flag. You might have to start signing waivers like, oh, if you really still need to purchase this home, we need you to sign this waiver to know that your foundation isn't set. And it's not what some people would call the sexiest of things. That concrete, when it's being done, when it's happening, it's not sexy to see concrete being poured and laid and set right, and how deep it goes, the digging of it. But it's what starts everything out. You got to get it checked. You got to make sure the foundation is laid correctly. And then from that point on, now like you mentioned, now the structure starts to happen. Oh, now you got the vaulted ceilings and then you start to make the additions on it. But if that foundation is not laid correctly, sometimes the water starts to seep in, and now
mm.
you gotta start something all over. So it's important that we do it, but a lot of us don't. So let's talk about the laying of this foundation. Like, what does that look like? Um, what are some things that us as fathers, this being the topic of conversation, because what kind of foundation should we be laying for our families and definitely for our children?
Man, I love that question. I love that question. I think that it all begins with your mind. The first thing is your thoughts. As a man, we should understand what our thoughts are, where our thoughts are going, what our thoughts are doing for us. Are our thoughts beneficial? Before we start, this is the process of laying foundation. This is the groundwork. The groundwork is what type of what type of man am I? Like, who am I?
You've been asking that. I think every morning that might be the question that one should ask themselves. Like, we've been talking about that's essentially how we started off the series. And I think in each context that we go into, whether it's value, whether it's worth, whether it's we haven't even got into occupation, but empowerment, whatever it all kind of comes back to the who am I? Right? Like, who am I as in this context? Who am I as a father?
Yeah,
How do we come to that understanding? Let's give some tangible ways of a person figuring out who they are, the, thinking upon those thoughts.
yeah. I like that, and I think that it's not just who am I as a father. It's like who am I as a man. And then you start to develop who am I as a father now, or who do I want to be as a father? I think those are the types of questions that we can ask ourselves before we even reach fatherhood, before we even reach marriage. Oh my gosh, man. If I had thought about this before I got married, before I had children, like I'm there's a good chance that I may have done things differently. Now, I don't want to take away from anything that I've already done because I enjoy my life. I enjoy the lessons that I've learned. And I don't know which one of the lessons if I had learned any lesson earlier, if that would change the results in what I have. But I mean, if you don't have a family yet, it's like you got this opportunity to solve some of these things, knowing that no matter what you come up with, the process may still be different. The process could still be absolutely the exact opposite of whatever you prepared for, but nonetheless, you are prepared. It's like going to take a test, and they give you and you start to read through a test bank. you don't know what questions will be on the test. You don't know if the ones that you studied for are going to be the ones that you actually see. So there's a good chance that studying that test bank may not render the types of results that you want to have, but you've studied. You're that much more prepared. So I want to say that some of the things that we want to think about as far as it goes for those, as far as preparing to be a father, is like my mindset. How compassionate am I? I think that's a good one. You've mentioned that multiple times. I think that compassion goes a long way. I think
Sure.
that the ability to think on your feet is very good. Strong decision maker, being able to rightfully, not even rightfully choose right from wrong, but being able to weigh out scenarios and situations. Discernment, I think that that's another one. But I would like to say that there's some rudiment things, and perception would be a very rudiment thing. Before all
Explain that. You said
this,
perception.
perception. Yes.
Explain that. Yeah, tell me more about that.
So perception being something, one of those root, figuratively, something that I believe should be at the very root of you're developing your identity as a father. I believe that that helps because of a couple of things. One, our perception is not always reality. It's our reality, but it doesn't mean that it's anybody else's reality. And understanding that that is true reality changes the way that we look at things, the way that we see things, the way that we hear things. And being able to understand that gives me the opportunity to then look into somebody else's perception and see, why do they see it that way? Or maybe even, and so I said, look into somebody else's reality, and the insinuation was that I'm looking into whomever it is that I'm with, my wife or my children. But I want to expand it beyond that and say, okay, so what if I take a book and I look into the reality of Jesus, or the reality of Paul or Peter or one of my mentors? And I see it. There used to be a saying, WWJD, what would Jesus do? And that is basically saying, what is the perception of Jesus, and how would he think about this? What kind of words would he say? And what are the actions that will follow? Those three things are extremely key when we start talking about perception. It's thought, communication, and action. And those three things we can truly hang our lifestyle on. It's what chooses our path, and it's what guides us to the place that we're going to be at. So I believe that perception is very, very necessary, because sometimes, though, one of the main reasons that we are failing in our communication is that we are solely focused on our own perception. We don't care about the perception of somebody else. And I'll give you something very simple, a very simple way of putting it. Let's say I believe that waking up early and exercising is a good thing. So I go and I wake up my wife and my children at 5 o'clock in the morning, because I believe this is the most positive thing that can ever happen. My wife gets upset with me. She yells at me. My children get up because they have to, but they resent me. And I just feel like, hey, listen, y'all need to get it together. And over time, you will learn that this was the best thing for you. This is my own perception. It, it may work out. I think David Goggins talked about being woke up early in the morning by his grandfather. And later on, many years later, he goes back and he tells the story about how that was the greatest thing that ever happened to him. I don't know that that happens to everybody. There could be built up resentment. My dad, he's crazy. He was waking me up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and all this stuff. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but I just mean that the perception. Sometimes we need to deliver our perspective to other people by using other talents like compassion, like communication, so that there can be an understanding and possibly even an acceptance. And then from there, the perception can become a shared perception, which gives us the ability to move forward together versus a demanding or a dominant force and factor inside of our household.
Yeah, I love it. I'll start from the top and get to the perspectives or the perceptions. You mentioned a couple, three values that I think are paramount. You mentioned compassion. You mentioned discernment, and you also mentioned patience. Patience as values, as to in regards to this context of fatherhood, that I think are some sound and solid values to kind of build on. I think so. Now we can all go into that and start to define these things for ourselves, which leads into what you mentioned, which in NLP we kind of call perceptual positions. And so the first position is you kind of seeing it from yourself, and people who are solely in the first position most of the time tend to be very narcissistic, right? Or they're looked at as being narcissistic because it's just the way that I think. It's how it
Mm,
goes. And sometimes we can come across as that because it's just blunt. You hear people say, I had to get it off my chest. I had to tell this person this. And although it could be the truth, it's not necessarily taken into consideration how this other person is going to take it. And what I have found for sure is that no matter how true it is, if you don't care about if people know that you don't care and it's just coming, no matter how truthful it is, they kind of don't care what you think. It doesn't matter about the truth. People will cut their nose to spite their face if they feel as if
mm,
you are, you know, you could be right, but it doesn't matter. You're not taking into consideration what it is that I feel. Now, that second position in NLP, neuro linguistic programming, is what we call the second position, is looking at the other person. Now, you have people who tend to overdo it. Whenever you hear someone says over, whatever, where they're in that second position, these tend to be the people pleasers. People who's, oh, I wonder what they're gonna, I wonder if I'm harming them, and they start to presume and make assumptions in regards to how this other person is thinking. So you can go into the first position, you can have the second position, which is what these other people are thinking, and then there's also a third position, which is just observing. You're
mm.
observing these two people during this example, and you don't make any judgment towards it. It's just this thing is happening, and you're kind of just paying attention to yourself, and you're paying attention to the other person. Now, what this does, to your point, brother, is that, and there's more than three positions. There's like five of them, but I'm just going to go into these three. Is that what that does? Is it gives you more information. It gives you more understanding for you to come back, and now it's like, okay, this is like part of wisdom. This is a person seeing something from, the same object, which is there. That's the fact. That's the common ground, but you're seeing it from different sides. So this person might be looking at me, and my father did this the other day. He's looking at a cup, and I'm like, it's a cup to me, and it's white. But from his position, he's looking at the cup and it says Super Dad on there. And he was like, yeah, but it says Super Dad. Now, if I'm stuck in my position, I'm just like, yeah, I don't believe you. It's a white cup. And he's like, I know it's a white cup, but it's a Super Dad. Now, how do we reconcile that conversation, from our standpoint? Because we're, especially anybody who's come this far listening to this conversation, how do we reconcile this? What we do is, in order for people to believe us or think these things that we're saying is true and see our position, we need to go to them, and
Yeah.
we need to say, okay, oh, it does say Super Dad. Well, and then say, okay, well, I definitely understand what you're saying is true. Now come on this side where I was standing from. Can you see what I was seeing? And now there's
Mm,
this compassion, this empathy, but oftentimes we have to take the first foot forward in that regards to it. That's the growth. That's the leadership that we have. I
mm.
think, and that gains us wisdom, because wisdom ultimately is just being able to see things from everybody's different positions. You know what I mean? Like, I got that position, I got that position. Now you add three, four more people into the room, and they're seeing it from a different standpoint based on their experiences. So definitely diving deep into those different values that you discussed, and there's more, right? Like a person could find more, but we identified some of the top three of them. And then definitely to your point, brother, the perceptual positions of how we take it in, and it not be a rigid way of thinking. It's not a it's either this way or it's that way, because ultimately it can be both. How do we kind of put those things together from our vantage point as we grow, and I would also add another thing, as we connect with the people it is in our
Mm.
lives that we deem most important. A lot of learning, a lot of understanding.
I like
I know
that.
we're coming up on time. I had these things here. I don't know how I want to get them in, but we talk about we'll save it for another day in regards to fatherhood and the trends and what's going on and the importance of having fathers, if not in the household, at least a part of the children's lives. And even how do we, if we're not in the household, how do we still contribute in a positive, loving, compassionate manner? Because that's what we're seeing nowadays. What for our demographic, for black demographics, it's only 33%. I think it's 77% of children are born into single parent households, and of those 77% of that are born into single parent households, 80% of them are in single mother led households. Right?
Mm.
These are the stats. This is what we're facing now at this point, and figuring out how do we kind of start to balance this out. But essentially, if you don't have a family as of yet, we can, what the brother said, what you explained earlier in regards to um your thought process, the mindset, the understanding part, how to develop and go through that. And you actually just did a video in regards to marriage on your YouTube channel. If you want to expound on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, go check it out. There's a second episode coming up. Just talks about marriage and the institution of marriage and some of the standpoint from a male's point of view, male perspective on getting married or why did I get married and that
Right.
type of thing. So it, some people have found it to be beneficial. So I definitely ask everyone go and check it out. Check it
Yeah.
out. Let me know. Put it in the comments. I got some pretty long comments on this video. I think somebody wrote me a book on this thing. So
Did they?
yeah, they did. And if you're watching this video, I intend on responding. It's just that the comment was so long that I haven't taken the I took the time to read the entire thing, but I haven't taken the time to address the thoughts that you have. So it's coming up soon. You'll probably get it in the next couple of days. All right. So definitely interested.
And here's my unsolicited opinion on the entire marriage thing, is that what I've noticed, and it was interesting. I was just in this family court, listening to the judge, and these people are getting divorces. I mean, this lady approved like this judge approved like 10 divorces in like 20 minutes. It was insane. And the first one that she did, the person was like, she was like excited, and and normally it doesn't happen in the courtroom, but she was like, yes, once the judge said this marriage has been dissolved. And I found it quite sad, because that's not what, my thought process on it. But to see this happening in real time, and as fast as it was happening, these marriages being dissolved in family court was incredible to me, because I have never seen anything like that before. But what I've also found is that we as men, what I'm looking at, and I'm seeing people talk about is, and we spoke about this a little bit earlier, if not getting your mind right, we find ourselves in situations where there's just a lot of correcting, like attempting to correct something that you got into because you weren't of the right mindset when you got into it. And you start to see, and I've started to see a lot of men, and pay attention to this word, start to overcorrect. They're overcorrecting. They're attempting to do something. So this conversation, and maybe this is the next conversation that we have in regards to this relationships, is, with when you start to see men start to experience a lot of growth, you know, in the self-development field, just within themselves, attempting to be, you know, the
That's
best
big.
that they, yeah, the best that they can be. And then you have a partner that you've been with 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and I'm sure it can go on either side. Like the partner might be getting better, right? Or starting to become their best self, starting to become aligned, starting to sit down and do some of the things that we're asking everyone to do, which is how much time are we sitting down to actually going over these things as a father? You're dealing with it, your child, you know, hopefully forever. Hopefully your child, you know, that's the normally what we want is for our child to outlive us. How much time are we spending figuring out like what are our value, what how are we aligned with our values,
That's it.
like mastering these moments and mastering our presence? How much time are we coming up with our ideologies? How much time are we developing, taking the time to develop our mindset and to connect with ourselves, that way we can connect with everyone else? Well, if you are in fact doing this, most people who are watching this episode, how do you bring your spouse along? Because imagine your
Ah,
spouse seeing this happen. Imagine you get with Joe. He's mentoring you over 6 to 12 months, whatever it is. Let's say 6 months, or you join the gathering, right? And you're getting all of this information that you probably never had before, and you're realizing discernment, like this is good, like this is what I aspire and inspire to be, and I'm motivated at this time, but it's in alignment with it's it, it it's something it's aligning with my spirit and my soul and my mentally, and this is good for us. But for someone on the outside looking in, seeing that and seeing that at such a rapid rate, because I've seen people go at we I look at Brandon sometimes and I'm just like, from in my little time of knowing Brandon, it's been like, it's been a huge a difference, right? Like just in that little amount of time. I think I've known Brandon maybe 2 3 months on the
mhm.
gathering, and just from that, from when he spoke, from the initial time that he spoke. And Brandon, forgive me if because I'm using you as an example. I'm not using your last name, but from that initial moment to now, when you hear him speak, I'm just like, oh, okay, because it just sits right within him. And and he's around you and he's having these conversations and he's seeing this going on. And can you imagine on the opposite side? I'm not saying this is the case for him, but anyone else, like, to be like, whoa, this person's changed, or it's different. This is different.
Mm,
How do you kind of go back and forth? And I think that's a conversation that should be had, because
mm,
it happens.
mm.
It
I
happens.
love it.
How do you grow with your partner? All right, yeah.
I love it. I love it, man. I think that's excellent. That's excellent what you just put out there. Those alignment and the values. You reminded me that's something that's inside of that video too. But that alignment is so very, very important. And you're hitting a nail on the head with what you're talking about right there. This growth system. And I'm going to tell you like this, getting back to young people and our children and how we're developing them. I was going to go to a quote, but getting back to that and just kind of like maybe coming to a few closing words and thought on fatherhood. It's like, what are we delivering to our children? This discernment is a real thing. This judgment is a real thing. The ability to look at something from different angles is a real thing. The ability to be compassionate, it is a real thing. The ability to be patient is a real thing. There's also things like being like humility, the ability to admit, hey, listen, I didn't do something to the best of my ability, or maybe if I did do it well, the other choice could have rendered better results, or maybe we'll go with your idea. It doesn't always have to necessarily be compromise, but compromise can be one of those things. Willingness is huge. Sometimes we as people, we find ourselves able to see another pathway, but we're not willing to actually take it. And determination, making it through, actually pressing forward. So when we deliver these things to our young people, because I want to say that men are doing a lot more self-development. And I think that maybe women are too. I don't know. But the more people do self-development, there's going to be a greater sense of awareness inside of those people to what they desire in life. And then if you have the opposite end of people who are not doing so, and when I'm saying self-development, I mean internal works. I do mean to have external works too, but from an internal perspective. For instance, nutrition as well as physical work. I think that that can be something that is generated from the inside. And when it's generated from the inside in the perspective of I'm doing this so that I can be a better human being, then at that point in time, I'm including that into the internal workings rather than I'm doing this so that I can have abs and I can have a beach bod so that people can appreciate me when I walk by. That's a different level. I'm not speaking to how other people view an individual, but how I view myself and being happy with me, being joyful with me, being okay with me. And when we do that, there's something that happens with the relationships that we begin to form. This is what has to be passed down to our children because the social media will put it out that if I just have a good looking bod, guys will like me. If I just have a good looking bod, girls will like me. If I just have a good looking bod, people will like me. Well, from a young lady out there without much brains, but's got a beautiful body, then guys may come by and think of her just as somebody to have for the night, but not for life. And if a guy goes out there and he's working it out and he's got this beach bod, he may be thinking that, hey, listen, this is going to attract the ladies. But it's a shallow lifestyle, climbing from one bed to another, if that's what it leads to. And this isn't, I don't think that this is what we should be putting into our children. The same way with money. Money is the money solves all things, according to Solomon. Money is not the root of evil, but the love of money is the root of evil. But if I put money up above my head and I give this image to my children that money is the only thing that ever matters, going around with stacks of cash and throwing it all over the place, being a shot caller inside of the club, my children may think that this is the lifestyle. This is the only lifestyle that matters. For somebody, that might be the only lifestyle that matters, but in my circle, it's not. That's not the only lifestyle that matters. No, there needs to be meaning inside of my lifestyle. There needs to be purpose inside of my lifestyle. So when you're talking about alignment and values, I need to know what I'm aligned with, and I need to know the values that I carry, and then I need to display them through my morals, through the character that I've developed, and I need to pass that on to my children. That's the thing that they need to grow up with. So that when my child meets a vain individual, when my daughter meets a vain young man, and he looks good, he's got the ripping muscles, he's the number one on some type of sports team, he can do the music, whatever it is. He's got the vehicle at a young age. He can do all those things, and he's pulled a group of individuals and he's got his eyes on her. She can look at him and see he is nothing but the clothes that he's wearing and the vehicle that he's driving. There's nothing deeper than that. There's no foundation inside of that man right there. He has no found. He is the epitome of Jesus saying that some built their house on the quicksands. If I move into his life and choose that lifestyle, I will be swept away by the winds of life. I will be carried away by the troubles of the storm. I will be destroyed, maybe not in an instant, but I will have a slow, prolonged death because I've chosen someone who has no foundational qualities. And my son can do the same thing. That's what we should be putting into our children. That's what we have to have inside of ourselves, because it's difficult to speak these things. There's some guys in the gathering who they say, I can't say the words that I'm thinking, but after I'm speaking with them over months and months, I'm like, you got it. It's inside of you. That's what's happening with men at large right now, is that men don't know how to necessarily communicate all of the good that's coming out of their heart when they're in these relationships, because
Yep.
they get blocked. They get blocked by
Mhm.
the other things. They get distracted by the things that come up,
Yep.
the arguments that come up. So they're unable to say, hey, I'm doing this because. And I believe that if these things don't start to change at large, then you're going to start to see more men that would rather be alone. Ladies, you're going to find more men.
Yeah.
You're going to find out that you think that all they wanted was what was in the pants. And even though they may take it, they will leave you afterwards
Mhm.
because you just ain't what they want. You're what they needed for one night, and you served a purpose. And if that hurts, change your ways.
Right.
Because men are getting tired of having to pay for everything just to get a little one night stand. I believe that men are starting to get this thing where they're like, it ain't worth it. The drama that comes with that. And God forbid they have a child and they continue with drama for age on time, and they don't want that to be projected onto their child, because men are not like that stereotype that once was declared about men being this type of individual that'll just have children all over the place and never take care of their kids. No, men are taking care of their kids. I know way too many men that I have spoken with that have been fighting for their children in the court systems when the women are doing damage to their children. I mean, to the sound of having sexual relationships in front of their children in the living room with another man while they haven't even got a well, the divorce papers are not even signed. Like,
Insane.
there's a lot going on. And I just don't think that we can simply blame men for everything. Now, granted, I'm sure there's a lot of cases for women, but I got to stand on the male's perspective today because I'm a man and that's who I deal with the most. And I'm listening to all these stories, and there's a lot of commonality inside of them. So,
Amen.
women, I would like to just say, there's one thing that you can do: get this thing together, do your own self development, be ready to go inside of that relationship before you actually start to go inside of it, and don't seek out tangible things. You need to figure out the values that you need inside of a man and the moral code that that man is going to live by. And if he's not living by that, don't get yourself trapped following that, because it can become like an addiction, like a drug. And that addictive attitude and behavior will lead you down to the same type of man every single time. And it will cause you to get on social media and everywhere else and say men are nothing but dogs. And that ain't true. It's not true. There's a lot of good men out there, just like there's a lot of good women. Stop looking for the bad ones. My bad.
I needed to breathe for a little bit. You gotta let it breathe. Men, this does not, you gotta set the tone, right? Everything the brother said is true. I drive, these thoughts come up in my mind, or these ideals, and I say, well, what animal does not want to be around their children? What, doesn't want to be successful within a partnership, and however it is that you all define it. But a lot of this comes from the men not setting the tone. So a
Mm,
part of this, in regards to this context, is the accountability part, brother. You brought up humility, and it's like because ultimately you have to take accountability for all these things that are happening. I'm gonna finish it up because I think what you said was more than enough, and that probably is going to go into the next episode. But developing your character is huge. Start immediately. Developing your values, and then you become in alignment. What that happens is that slows down the chaos. It gives you clarity. It gives you organization, and then there's less hesitation to do ultimately the right things. You automatically know this is for me, this is not for me. You're not able to be deceived like that once you know what you're bringing it back to. So you have to have that rule and guide that keeps you in alignment what's going on with your values. This is what it is. That way you can stay away from the shame. People can't shame you into doing things. You don't feel guilty. You don't have to prove yourself to be something according to what somebody else says. You spoke about that, brother. The validation, external validation. You're looking for this external validation through these surface level things, these aesthetic things that aren't they don't mean anything. So wow,
Yeah.
the brother got off. And that's it. And I want you all to follow
You
it.
started it. You
Did
started it.
I?
Yeah, you started
I
that
might
thing.
I might have compelled you, but it was in you that it had to come out. It was on your heart and it had to come out.
Yeah,
Yeah, so appreciate it. Guys, love you. It's another
yeah.
episode, man. Time well spent. Appreciate it. We will see you next week.
All right. Peace.